My name is Marlowe Hayes. I am 22 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is my real story, one that has haunted every second of my life for the last 2 years, and before you dismiss it as just another ghost tale, I want you to understand that what I lived through nearly destroyed me, nearly erased me from this world, and it all began with a curse that was born long before. I was a curse tied to my family's blood, a curse waiting patiently in the shadows of a small forgotten town called Ashthorne Ridge, where I grew up thinking the world was safe until the night everything I loved was ripped away, until the night I realized that revenge doesn't always die with the dead. Sometimes it festers, sometimes it breathes, and sometimes it comes back for you when you least expect it. So please stay with me until the end of this story, because every second matters. Every word you hear might one day save you or someone you love, and before I begin, don't forget to hit subscribe. Like this video and share it with others, because silence is how evil wins, and my silence nearly cost me my soul. And remember, this story is written and edited by Dark Life Side Diaries. It was late October, the year after I graduated college, when the first strange thing happened, the kind of thing you almost laugh off at first, the kind of thing you tell yourself is just a coincidence, except it wasn't. It never was not in Ashthorne Ridge. I was living back at home with my mother after my father's sudden death, trying to piece together what my future would look like when I began noticing that my mother, was unraveling in quiet ways, talking to herself in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep, leaving bowls of milk outside the back door, whispering prayers I didn't recognize in a language I didn't understand, and when I asked her about it, she would go pale, shake her head, and change the subject. But one night, curiosity got the better of me, and I followed her barefoot and silent out to the backyard where the trees began, and I watched as she placed 3 candles in a perfect circle on the dirt, lit them, and whispered the name Elara over and over, her voice trembling like a woman begging forgiveness. And in that moment, I swear to you, the woods answered back, not with words, but with a low moaning wind that curled around us both, carrying with it the smell of burning flesh. And when she realized I was watching, she blew out the candles so fast the smoke choked the air and screamed at me to go inside, and I had never seen fear in her eyes like that before, a fear that told me this was no superstition, no harmless ritual, this was something real, something dangerous. I tried to press her about it, but she shut me down, said I wouldn't understand, said it wasn't safe to talk, and I let it go for a while until the nightmares began, dreams where a woman's face appeared in the dark. Not whole, not human anymore, her eyes hollow, her skin cracked like it had been scorched in fire, and she would whisper my name, not Marlowe, but daughter. And I would wake to the sound of footsteps dragging through the hallway, slow, deliberate, and when I opened my bedroom door, there would be nothing there but the smell of smoke, faint, as though the house itself had caught fire long ago and never healed. At first I thought maybe grief was twisting my mind, that losing Dad had broken us both in different ways, but then little things began happening that no grief could explain. The mirror in the bathroom would fog up even when no one had taken a shower, and on that fog I saw the word ode traced by an invisible hand. The lights flickered, not randomly, but in patterns, 3 short bursts. 3 long, 3 short again, and when I looked it up, I realized it was Morse code spelling the word debt. And one night, when my best friend Kira stayed over, we heard scratching on the window at 3:07 a.m., the same exact minute the old town records said the Ashthorne farmhouse had burned down in 1911, and when Kira pulled the curtain aside, there was no one there, only the imprint of a hand pressed into the glass, long fingers stretched unnaturally wide, and before we could even scream, the glass cracked from the pressure as though the hand were real and still pressing against it, and Kira grabbed me, terrified, whispering, Marlowe, that wasn't human. From then on, I couldn't escape her, the woman from my dreams, the one my mother called Elara. She began showing herself in fragments, reflections in darkened windows, a face in the corner of the TV screen. When it was turned off, a voice humming an old lullaby my mother once sang to me, and I knew then that whoever she was, she wasn't just haunting me, she was claiming me, and the more I resisted, the more violent her presence became. Dishes flying off counters, doors slamming so hard the wood splintered, my bed shaking in the dead of night as though something crawled beneath it and through it all. My mother refused to explain until one night she broke down and told me the truth. Our family was cursed, tied to Elara Ashthorne, a woman burned alive by the town a century ago after they accused her of witchcraft, though the real crime was that she had married into the Hayes family and threatened to reveal secrets that powerful men wanted buried, so they silenced her with fire, and in her last breath she swore vengeance not just on the town but on our bloodline. And every daughter born of Hayes would belong to her until her debt was paid. My father's sudden death, she said, wasn't an accident, it was part of the curse. Claiming him for trying to shield us, and now it was my turn unless I found a way to break it, but no one ever had, and in that moment as my mother wept, I realized she wasn't just afraid for me. She was resigned, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment, waiting to lose me to something she couldn't fight. But I wasn't ready to surrender. I wasn't ready to let Elara take me, and if this curse was born of revenge, then I would find a way to turn that revenge back on her, even if it meant walking straight into the fire she left behind the days after my mother's confession blurred into a haze of dread, every hour heavy with the weight of something I couldn't control. And though I tried to convince myself that curses weren't real, that ghosts couldn't touch the living, the truth clawed through every corner of my house like smoke that wouldn't clear, and the more I denied Elara's presence, the stronger she became, as if feeding off my refusal to acknowledge her. Nights turned into a battleground where sleep became impossible because every time I closed my eyes, I saw her not in fragments anymore, but fully a tall, thin woman with hair like strands of ash, her mouth torn wide as if still screaming from the fire, her hands blistered and cracked, but always reaching, always calling. "Honey, daughter," in a voice that made my skin crawl, and worse, when I woke I wasn't alone. There would be footprints on my bedroom floor, dark scorched shapes leading from the window to the foot of my bed, stopping right where I slept, and no matter how many times I scrubbed the floor, they returned the next night, darker, deeper, as if burning themselves into the wood. Kira stopped coming over after the night. She saw her too, saw Elara's reflection in the glass of my mother's china cabinet, even though no one stood in front of it, and she screamed so loud the neighbors came running, but of course no one else saw, and Kira begged me to leave Ashthorne Ridge, to run, to get as far from my house in this town as I could, but what she didn't understand was that you can't outrun a curse that's written in your blood, no matter how many miles you put between you and the place it began. I tried to distract myself with normal things, working part-time at the diner, spending afternoons at the library, walking through the town square with headphones in, but even then she found me. One afternoon, while shelving books at the library, I felt a chill sweep across the room so sharp it made the hairs on my neck rise, and when I turned, there she was standing in the far aisle, her body blackened like charcoal, her dress in tatters, her head tilted as if studying me, and before I could move, every single light in the library flickered off, plunging us into darkness, except for the faint glow of her burning eyes, and I swear they weren't just watching me, they were inside me, stripping away my will, whispering in my skull that I was hers, that my family had stolen her life, and I was the price she was owed. When the lights came back, she was gone, but the smell of smoke lingered, and the book I'd been holding had turned to ash in my hands, crumbling between my fingers. Terrified, I returned home that evening, only to find my mother sitting rigid in her chair by the window, her eyes bloodshot and swollen from crying, clutching an old leather-bound journal, and when I asked her what it was, she whispered that it had belonged to my grandmother, the only Hayes woman who had ever dared to confront Elara directly, and in its brittle pages were records of rituals, failed attempts at breaking the curse notes, written in desperation as generations of my family watched daughters waste away or vanish without explanation, and one entry made my stomach drop. It described a fire in the woods, a fire set deliberately by my great-grandmother in an attempt to trap Elara's spirit, but instead of ending the curse, it only seemed to strengthen her, binding her deeper to the land, deeper to us, as though every act of resistance only gave her more power. And written at the bottom in frantic ink was one final warning: she does not forgive, she does not forget, she does not stop. My mother admitted she had tried small offerings, milk, candles, prayers, not to break the curse, but to delay it, to keep Elara satisfied long enough to spare me, but now it was clear nothing would hold her back. And that night, when the house went silent, when the air grew heavy, I knew the waiting was over. At exactly 3:07, the floorboards groaned under the weight of something moving down the hallway, slow, dragging closer and closer to my door, and though my mother was praying loudly in the next room, the sound didn't stop. It only grew louder until my doorknob began to turn metal, squealing against unseen hands. And I froze, holding my breath, watching as the knob twisted fully, the door inching open, though I hadn't touched it, and in the crack of the doorway I saw her, the outline of a woman burned black, her body steaming with heat, her eyes glowing white like coals, and when she pushed the door wide, the walls trembled as if the house itself recognized her, and she stepped into my room, smoke rolling off her in waves, filling my lungs, and she whispered, "Marlowe Hayes, your debt is due." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat seized tight, and she reached for me with blistered fingers that stretched longer and longer, her nails sharp and black, and just as they grazed my cheek, my mother burst into the room with the journal clutched in one hand chanting words in that strange language I had heard before, her voice shaking but firm, and Elara shrieked a sound so piercing it shattered the glass in my windows, and the force of it threw me against the wall, knocking the breath from my chest. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was my mother standing between me and Elara, her body trembling, her face twisted in fear but defiant, and Elara's figure turning to smoke and flame, vanishing into the floorboards when I woke. Hours later, the sun was rising, but my mother was gone, not just from the room, but from the house entirely, and in her chair by the window sat only the leather journal, its pages now blank as though whatever words it once carried had been burned away, and carved into the wood of a chair deep and fresh was a single word, mine. My mother vanished, leaving behind only the hollow echo of her prayers, and that single word carved into the chair. I felt something in me crack, a sharp tearing that no amount of logic or denial could stitch together, because I knew then that Elara wasn't playing anymore. She wasn't just haunting me. She had claimed what she wanted, and my mother was the proof that resisting her carried a price. But even in my grief and fear, a fire lit inside me, something fierce and stubborn, because if she thought I would simply hand myself over like some obedient heir to her vengeance, she underestimated me. And so I turned to the only clue I had left, the journal. Its pages now blank, though when I touched them I swore I felt a heat under my fingertips, as if words still smoldered beneath the surface, waiting to be coaxed out. And after hours of running my hands over the parchment, desperate, I saw faint lines rise like scars on skin, words burned into the paper that slowly revealed themselves, and what I read made my chest tighten. The journal wasn't destroyed, it was sealed, and the words I saw told me that only through fire could the truth be revealed. Again, so I lit a candle and held the pages over its flame, watching as invisible ink bled into view, filling the book with frantic handwriting, drawings of sigils, and accounts of encounters with Elara that spanned generations, each entry echoing the same warning: she's bound to the ridge, bound to the ashes of the place where she died, and every daughter of Hayes must walk the fire or be consumed by it. But in the margins of one page, written in trembling script, was something different. A hint of defiance to end her: you must face her where she was born, a flame, offer blood for blood, fire for fire, and choose to burn what you love most. I sat there shaking, staring at the words, knowing exactly what it meant. If I wanted to end this curse, I would have to go to the ruins of the Ashthorne farmhouse, the very ground where Elara had died, and sacrifice something more precious than my own fear. But what that sacrifice was, I didn't know, and the thought of fire swallowing me alive like it had her made my skin crawl. Still, the nights after my mother disappeared grew unbearable, the haunting relentless. Elara's shadow followed me into every room, her voice seeped into every moment of silence, whispering promises of power if I surrendered, threats of torment if I resisted, and worst of all, she showed me visions of my mother trapped, screaming, burned, but alive, begging me to end it, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I told Kira everything, every cursed detail, and though she looked at me like I was unraveling, she didn't walk away. She said, if you're going into those woods, you're not going alone. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope, slim but real, because I wasn't fighting her in silence anymore. We spent days preparing, gathering salt, candles, matches, even an old iron knife Kira insisted might have some use, and on Halloween night, when the veil between the living and the dead was said to be thinnest, we walked into Ashthorne Woods together, following the winding trail that led to the ridge, and the deeper we went, the colder the air grew, the trees groaning as though alive, their branches arching like claws, and the silence pressed against us until even our breath sounded too loud. When we reached the clearing where the farmhouse had once stood, the ground was blackened, scarred by fire, though a century had passed, and in the center, half buried in ash and earth, stood the charred remains of a stone foundation, cracked and crumbling, but radiating heat as though the fire still burned beneath it. And as we stepped closer, I heard her Elara singing a lullaby in a language I couldn't place, the melody weaving through the air until it wrapped around my chest like chains, pulling me forward, and I realized with horror that my body wasn't entirely my own anymore, her will tugging at my limbs, urging me to kneel before the ruins, to surrender. Kira grabbed my arm, shaking me, shouting my name, and her voice broke the trance long enough for me to light the candles in a circle the way my mother once had, placing the journal in the center, its pages fluttering in a wind that seemed to rise from the earth itself, and I read the words aloud, the ritual scrawled in my great-grandmother's desperate hand, and as I did, the ground shook, ash rising in spirals around us, and Elara appeared not as a shadow this time, but as flesh, burned, blackened, dripping with smoke and fire. Her mouth curled in a smile that wasn't human, and she said, daughter, you came to me My knees buckled, terror clawing at me, but I forced myself to keep reading, my voice trembling as the words demanded blood for blood, and before I could question it, the journal burst into flames, and Elara screamed a sound like iron scraping against bone, her body convulsing as if the fire that once killed her now bound her. And then she looked at me with hatred so deep it felt like knives, and she whispered, "If you will not give freely, I will take what you love." And before I could move, Kira was lifted off the ground by invisible hands, choking, clawing at her throat as if hung by a noose of smoke, her eyes bulging in terror. I screamed, begging Elara to stop, but she only laughed, the sound splitting the night, and I remembered the words, "Offer blood for blood, fire for fire," and in that moment my choice became clear. If sacrifice was what she wanted, then I had to give it, but not in the way she expected. With shaking hands, I grabbed the iron knife, drew it across my palm, and flung my blood into the fire circle, shouting Elara's name, claiming her, binding her to me. And for a moment, the forest went silent, the fire blazed brighter, and she recoiled, screaming as the flames licked at her skin, but then she lunged, her burned hands closing around mine, searing my flesh, and she hissed, "You cannot end me, you are me." Pain ripped through me, my blood boiling as if merging with hers, and I realized the terrible truth. The curse wasn't just meant to haunt us, it was meant to consume us, to fold every Hayes daughter into her until nothing of us remained but her vengeance, her rage, her fire. Kira fell to the ground, gasping, freed only because Elara had focused all of herself on me, and through the haze of agony I forced the knife into her chest, expecting it to pass through smoke, but it sank in deep, and her scream tore the night apart, shaking the ground, splitting the trees, and for a heartbeat I thought I had won, until the knife melted in my hands, turning to ash, and her charred body collapsed into me, merging, burning, branding her hatred into my skin. And the last thing I heard before darkness swallowed me was her whisper, "Daughter, we are one." When I woke after the ritual at the ridge, my body felt like it was no longer mine, my veins burning as though molten fire ran through them, and every breath carried the taste of ash. But worse than the pain was the voice that now lived inside my skull, Elara's voice, whispering, laughing sometimes, weeping sometimes, screaming, always reminding me that I'd failed to destroy her, that by cutting my hand and calling her name, I had invited her and tethering her spirit to mine more tightly than any haze before me. And though I staggered home that night with Kira's arm around me, though she whispered that I was safe, now I knew the truth. The battle had only just begun, because Elara hadn't been weakened, she'd been made flesh again through me. In the days that followed, I tried to cling to normalcy, but nothing about me was normal anymore. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes flickered with embers that weren't mine, my skin bore faint burns that no doctor could explain, and when I touched objects, sometimes they smoldered, leaving scorch marks where my fingers had been. And though I hid it from Kira, she noticed the way my voice sometimes changed mid-sentence, deeper, older, as though another spoke through me. And one night, when she reached to comfort me, I flinched away, not out of fear, but out of the sudden, overwhelming urge to hurt her, an urge that wasn't mine, but Elara's, her hunger for vengeance seeping through me. And I realized then that this curse wasn't about taking my life, it was about using me to finish what she started, to destroy the descendants of those who had burned her alive. That realization came too late to save the first victim. 2 nights later, I woke to find myself standing outside the home of Sheriff Alden, whose family the journal had said had led the mob that killed Elara in 1911, and though I didn't remember walking there, I stood watching as his house burned, flames roaring higher than any natural fire, his screams piercing the night. And the sickest part was that I felt satisfaction, like part of me had wanted it. And when I looked down at my hands, they were covered in soot and blood, and Elara's voice purred in my ear, "Justice, daughter, one by one they will all fall." I stumbled back, horrified, but the truth couldn't be undone. I was her weapon now. Kira confronted me, terrified, begging me to fight it, to leave town, to find some priest, some ritual, some way out. But I knew what she didn't. This curse wasn't something to be banished. It was older, deeper. It was a wound stitched into the bones of Ashthorne Ridge itself. And if I wanted to end it, I couldn't run. I had to walk straight into the fire and burn it out from within. The journal's final words haunted me, "Fire for fire, blood for blood, choose to burn what you love most." And I finally understood. The only way to sever her was not through resisting, not through denial, but through sacrifice. The kind that would leave me empty, broken, maybe even dead, but free. So I returned to the ridge, Kira at my side, despite my pleas for her to stay away. And I carried with me the last relic of my mother's, the silver locket she wore every day, the one with my baby picture inside, the one she had clutched when she whispered Elara's name that night in the yard. And I knew what I had to do because if fire demanded something precious, then I would burn the last tether of my bloodline's love even if it shattered me as we entered the clearing. The ground cracked open with heat smoke rising like a veil, and Elara emerged no longer a ghost but flesh through me, her charred body flickering in and out of mine, her laughter filling the forest until the trees shook and she raised her hands, flames erupting in a circle around us, trapping us inside. Kira screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to run, only forward, and I shouted Elara's name, demanding her face me, and for the first time she stepped out fully, her body towering, her eyes white hot, her mouth opening in a howl that rattled my bones, and she sneered, "Daughter, you cannot kill what you are." With trembling hands, I held the locket to my chest, whispered my mother's name, whispered my father's, and then hurled it into the fire, screaming words I didn't know until they poured out of me, words in the language my mother had once prayed in, words that burned my throat, and the fire roared higher, consuming the locket, consuming me, and Elara shrieked, lunging, clawing, trying to drag me down with her, but I held my ground, feeling my skin blister, feeling my soul tear, and I shouted, "You are not my mother, you are not my blood, you are the fire, and I'm the end of it." The flames swallowed us, both blinding, searing, and in those final moments I felt her rage, her sorrow, her centuries of pain crashing into me, but I also felt her weakened, fracture, splinter, until the forest erupted in a scream so loud it split the earth, and then there was silence. When I opened my eyes, the ridge was cold, the ashes still, the fire gone, and Elara was nowhere, her voice gone from my head, her presence torn away, leaving me hollow, scarred, but alive. Kira pulled me from the ground, sobbing, clutching me like I was real again, and though my hands were burned, though my face would forever carry the marks of fire, I was free, or so I thought. That night, as we walked home under a sky too quiet, I heard a faint whisper carried on the wind, not in rage, not in threat, but in something worse, a promise soft and certain: ashes never die. Thanks for listening to my story. If you made it this far, you are stronger than most. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video, because every voice that hears what happened to me keeps the truth alive, and maybe, just maybe, helps protect another girl from the shadows of Ashthorne Ridge.